Hello, folks. Many years ago, whenever, it was probably about 2011 or so, I had just started preaching, and I was watching TV, and I believe it was Benjamin Netanyahu had given a speech, and I got a whole message off of that speech. And I went to church in Charleston and basically took everything that he had said in that speech and told what was going on, that in the natural political form of it that he was talking about, and told how that it was applied to the spiritual situation at that time. And so I preached that in Charleston Church, and they said, after I got through preaching it, they said, did I preach it, or I can't remember. I think I either preached it, or I told pastor there, and he's like, you need to go preach that in Ohio. So they called up Don Parnell, and then I went off to Ohio. And so anyway, I think that was that was really the first full sermon that I ever preached in Ohio, was the spiritual typology of a political leader's speech at that time, which is Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel. Okay. So anyway, so I said all that to say this. I have gotten another one. I have gotten another sermon type exactly like that, except for it's come from somebody who most of the world, or at least most of our world anyway, would probably absolutely not suspect. Let's just say it's come from the other side of the world, and beyond the Iron Curtain, let's say. So anyway, excuse me, it's allergy season. October's always bad for allergies. Okay, so anyway, in short, I was watching YouTube, and we just had the meetings at the United Nations, and I guess it's New York. And, all the leaders from all over the world come to say whatever they want to say at the UN. And the Russian foreign minister, a guy named Sergei Lavrov, got up to give a speech. And from his speech is where I will take my sermon. Of all people in the world that I could get a sermon off of, I happened to get one off of the Russian foreign minister to the UN. Okay, or just the Russian foreign minister, but he was speaking at the UN just, a week ago or so, thereabouts. So, what he said in that sermon, speech of his, was exactly what I have been trying to say for a very long time, that is going on in the spiritual. And apparently, they have known it in the natural for a very long time too. So anyway, but I guess I'm going to have to give a little bit of history and a little bit of background before I can to build up to get into his speech. His speech was about how that the UN formed after World War II, and all the things that the UN was supposed to have done and what it ended up doing, essentially, is what he was talking about in relations to the countries around the world, or the a lot of the former colonized countries around the world, etc., and the Western countries, and how it all relates. And so that was what his speech was about. So I'm going to have to do just a little bit of history to get it up to that point, so everybody will know where I'm coming from. But many years ago, I preached those war messages and had us in World War II, and that's over now. That was, you could say it's over. That was where we were at the time in dealing with the message people, and it was a great struggle, you might say, coming out of that era into this new era. Before that era, basically, the Second World War, the World Wars, changed everything from the old colonial world to the new world, basically. And because all those countries that were fighting were basically colonial Western countries, with the exception of Japan and a few others. But well, really, Imperial Japan was Japan's attempt at colonialization itself, although they weren't a Western power. They were an Eastern power. But anyway, nonetheless, what you had was, short version is before the war, after the war, you had the UN. And the UN was formed, and all of these Western colonial governments that had colonies all around the world, mostly in what is called the Global South, gave up all their colonies. And those colonies had self-determination to rule themselves, to pick their own leaders, presidents, or however, etc., etc. So they had self-determination to form their own dynasty, as you might say, and or their own destiny. What's it called? It's to pursue their own destiny, self-determination, the rights of self-determination. But before that, those countries were colonies of the Western powers. Like, for example, the Philippines was a colony of the United States. India was a colony of Great Britain. Several different ones. Spain had a lot of colonies. France had a lot of colonies, etc., etc. Germany had colonies. All the Western powers had colonies. And so anyway, what that represented was in the spiritual terms, what you had was you had from Martin Luther, you had the church ages, and the church ages had these had the church age messengers, and where did they all come from? Europe and America. You got like Martin Luther from Germany, you got John Wesley from England, you got William Branham from the United States. Okay, all these, and that's where all the movement was of Protestantism and all that was going on there. And so what happened was in the natural, these countries were taking colonies over, like in Africa or South America or East Asia or wherever, and they were sending people, their colonists there, to colonize those places and to have dominion over those places, essentially. So anyway, in the spiritual, the exact same thing was going on, because the churches, like the Methodist Church or the Lutheran Church or the Branhamite Church or whatever, they were formed in Europe and in America. And just like the Europeans and Americans were going around all over the world at that time, colonizing all these places in the political realm of things, the natural realm of things. In the spiritual realm, all these countries were in the spiritual realm. All these spiritual movements or church ages, etc., denominations that were forming, were sending missionaries to all these same types of places that in the natural was getting colonized. They were sending these missionaries to all these places and colonizing those same peoples by doctrine of the mind, by theology, by spirituality, whatever. So, like, for example, William Branham going to Africa, for example, could have been considered like a colonization process in a sense. The Baptist Billy Graham going overseas or something would have been a colonization, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the Methodists going to New Zealand and Australia or something would have been that was colonization of the land, spiritually speaking. So you had natural colonization and spiritual colonization going on. Okay. So what happened was sorry, allergies. Okay. So what happened was eventually everything denominated, and if it was ever good to start with, and you had essentially dominions or colonies And what they were doing was both in the natural and in the spiritual, they answered to their overseas lords, essentially. Like, for example, if you had, say, the United States had a colony, and we use the Philippines for example. What happened was the Philippines could have its own leader per se, but the real colonial lord of the Philippines would have been Franklin Delano Roosevelt in the United States. And what was going on was the colony of the Philippines, for example, was people growing and producing things, and it was getting shipped off to the United States or wherever they could make money at it, wherever the elites wanted this stuff. They wanted the good bananas, the good coconuts, the good rice, that was grown in the Philippines. All the other ones, same thing. India, it was producing, and the British were getting their tea or whatever, or whatever, wherever the situation may have been. And so, and eventually the people began to have enough of it, because they had, the age of colonization had to end, because the people were beginning to see through, hey, they didn't want to be colonized anymore. Okay, so, and then that was about the time World War II happened. Now, after World War II, everybody pretty much gave up all their colonies, on paper anyway. So, before World War II, everybody had colonies. It was colonial powers against colonial powers. And that was basically what the war, especially in the East, was about, because Japan went around, and Japan went and took over the Philippines, and then the United States came and took it back over. So it was a war over colonialization. The Japanese had been fighting in China and everywhere else since the early 30s, and they were trying to colonize everything. They were trying to colonize East Asia. So, but anyway, so after the war was over, things changed. And the old idea of colonization was over, and it moved into something else. Okay, so you take that in the natural. What happened in the natural? All these places that were colonized in the natural, that were colonized in the spiritual, and what was going on? Like I said, the Philippines had answered to their colonial lord FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt in the United States. The same thing was going on essentially in the spiritual sense, because the colonial powers of the spiritual sense was doing the same thing. Like, they had a Baptist church in the Philippines. Well, the head of the Baptist church is in the United States somewhere. There was a Methodist church, and a head of the Methodists is somewhere in the West, in the Western powers, but there was a Methodist church somewhere in Southeast Asia, and they were colonized. Essentially, they were colonized in the mind, because they were colonized naturally, that they had to send their coconuts and rice and bananas to the United States or whatever. But they were colonized in the mind because their spiritual fruits, essentially, that's a good way of putting it, their spiritual fruits were colonized, in that they had to give up their spiritual fruits to the colonial lordship in, like I said, the head of the Baptists in the United States or something, or the head of the Branhamites in the United States. Okay, they were giving up, because the Branhamites are just like the rest of them. They've got colonies all over the place, Branham churches in every country of the world probably, and that's just colonies, essentially. So anyway, what do those colonies do? Those Branhamite churches. Well, when they come together, when a Branhamite church in Africa comes together and has church on Sunday morning and worships and essentially worships the message of William Branham, then they are giving up their spiritual fruits. That's no different than an African guy out in some African country colonized by France or something, that's got to grow rice and beans or something and send it to their lords in France. Okay, so anyway, that's how colonization, both natural and spiritual, works. Fruits, spiritual fruits. Okay, so anyway, now we're up to getting on to where we're at now. So what happened was, as we know, the third coming come along and changed everything. The war come along and changed everything. And then what happened post-war? What happened post-war changed everything. But it was, the war and post-war was kind of related. So we had the war. We had the third coming. The third coming come along. And what happened was both in the natural and in the spiritual, the concept of colonialism, colonization, went by the wayside. Because in the natural, the British were giving up. The British had the biggest empire of anybody. And the British were giving up their colonies left and right, for the longest time. America was give up the Philippines. All this happened in about the late 40s, early 50s in there. At about the time the UN was formed, that's when they gave up all their colonies, and they did things different after that. Because the age of colonialism in that sense was over. And when the third coming message come along, the age of colonialism of, like say, the message pastors ruling and reigning over the colonies, the Branhamite church colonies in Africa and in Southeast Asia, etc., wherever, that age, the thinking on that became old thinking. That became essentially the church version of imperialist thinking. That was old church age mentality on how you did things. And see, during the church ages, they had colonialism. Well, once the church ages was over, then come the third coming message, and then the third coming message done away with the concept of course, there's still some holdouts that were, still got them to this day, but it done away. It improved upon the idea of having colonies in such a form as that. So essentially, anybody that could hear, understand the third coming message was no longer going to be colonized by the Branham Church, essentially. So, and to go along with it, what happened was whenever they gave up their colonies in the natural, then, like for example, the Philippines got to be its own country and had its own right to self-determination or whatever, and self-rule. Then the Philippines got to pick its own president, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. So what happened was in the spiritual side of things, when the third coming come, which done the same thing as that in the spiritual, then what happened was we understood that we are Christ, that we, each of us, are Christ, and we don't need some pastor, some lording pastor over us, some spiritual colonial lord to tell us what to do, essentially. We have our own right to self-determination and to pick our own president, which is us, because we're the Christ. See? So we become the president. See, in the Philippines had a lord had FDR as Lord in America. Okay, that's the same thing in the natural, in the spiritual, because the people in the Branhamite church, wherever they were at, whether they were in the West or they were in the South or wherever, they had a Lord who was the pastor essentially, or the pastor's pastor, or whoever, and they were the colonial lord over those people in the church. Okay, so those people had no right to self-determination. And the Philippines had no right to self-determination because they could not vote their own president in. But whenever they got the right to self-determination, then they could vote their own president in. So they voted their own guy in, so they had a Filipino leader of the Filipinos, a Philippine leader of the Philippines. Okay, not an American leader of the Philippines, a Philippine leader of the Philippines. So what happened? They become their own president. They become their own thing instead of somebody else lording over them. Okay, and that's what happened to you when the third coming come along, and you understood that you are the Christ, and you don't need some pastor to intermediate essentially in such a form as that. Then you became self-determined, and you became your own pastor essentially. And like in the Philippines, they had their own president became their own guy became their president. Well, in the spiritual, you became your own president essentially. You became your own Christ. The pastor, he was the nearest thing to Christ for you, so you had to have him. You had to have FDR. But now you are it. Okay, at least that was theoretically the idea. Okay, so anyway, now let's get on up into what proceeded after that. And I haven't even got to Lavrov's speech yet. But I had to get it there just so everybody would understand where we're at. That was the basic concept of things. That was the idea, and that was a great idea. Certainly it was. Okay, we're all third coming people here that's probably listening to this, so that was a great idea. In the beginning, that was a great idea. That was what this was all about, and that was what the United Nations was all about. The United Nations, and subsequently, or at the same time period, see, they set up the United Nations and they got rid of all their colonies all at the same time. And what happened was the United Nations was set up so that the charter of the UN is something to the degree of everybody has self-determination, right to their own destiny, right? All these countries. So then what they did was they said, okay, so everybody is going to rule their own country, and we're not going to have colonies anymore. And everybody's Christ, and you are the Christ, and then everybody's going to have a seat at the table. Everybody, like the Philippines, the Philippines ain't going to be represented by the United States at the negotiation tables anymore at the ends of the wars, because if, like, for example, if you were a colony of another country, if you were a colony of a Western country, say you were some country in Africa, and say you're in World War I ends, well, then your country gets represented by whatever country you were a colony of. If you were a colony of France, then at the end of the war, then the French represented you, and you didn't really get represented because you were just a colony of France. You weren't your own country. Okay, well, you were your own country, but you weren't your own country. So anyway, but then when the UN came and everybody gave up all their colonies, then what happened was all those countries that were former colonies, they got to come and sit at the table with everybody else on equal grounds. Was the idea that, for example, the Philippines, which had been a former colony, they got to come and sit down right there whenever the UN is set up to where everybody comes, all the countries come, and they all sit down together. And they've got representatives of each country, and they all sit down together. Nobody's better than nobody else. They're all there, and everybody from every country has the right to get up at the UN assembly and give a speech, and then sit back down. Okay, so everybody has equal say to get up and say whatever, and it don't matter if you were a former colony or you're a Western country or what. Everybody is on equal footing at that point. Okay, that was the concept of the United Nations. And that, my friends, was the concept of the third coming. That's exactly what it was. Okay, it's equal footing for everybody, and we are all Christ, and there's no big me's and little u's and all this and that. No colonies and no big powerful colonizer countries, and it was to even everything out. That was the concept. Okay, which was a great concept, whether it was in the UN or whether it was in the spiritual. Those were both good concepts. Okay, and I firmly believe in both. However, here's what's happened since then, and I'm going to start to get into Lavrov's speech. But as you all know, we have many issues going on around the world today of wars and this and that. See, the idea was that the UN was going to stop the wars, because they had just fought two major wars, and they didn't want to, people's getting nuclear weapons and everything else. Well, they might just blow up the whole world. Okay, so we got to have this UN so we can settle disputes without blowing up the whole world, without everybody going to war and killing millions of people like they'd been doing. So anyway, and that was the idea. However, that, especially as of late, has seemed to not be doing so good of a job at stopping any wars, because the wars seem to be raging everywhere, just like they did back in the day. A lot of the things, especially now, are coming back. They're talking about things that they hadn't seen since World War II. A war this large in between Russia and Ukraine, that's something that had never been seen since World War II. That many people fighting anywhere in Europe. Okay, so, here we are back again after we had formed the United Nations, but yet here we are back again fighting again. Okay, and in other places all around the world. You could name 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so my question is, the UN was a good concept, but has it really worked? And why has it worked, or hasn't it worked? Okay, so anyway, let me get to the rest of it. There are more parallels of, we've paralleled up to the point of the beginning of the UN and how it was founded on a good idea and, love and peace for all, essentially. Then what happened was see, you have an organization called NATO, and NATO is the North Atlantic Trade Organization, as I recall. And what it is it's a group of Western countries, primarily led by the United States. It's the United States, Europe, generally all of Western Europe especially, and into Eastern Europe, and even now they're trying to get like an Asian wing, I think, of NATO, which would probably be like, for example, Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines. Okay, and then wherever else they can go to. But I've heard that that's a possibility. But anyway, you have NATO. NATO's the Western powers, the old colonial Western powers, essentially. And then you have the other side, which is the other side, essentially. Hang on, washing machine's beeping. Okay, that's a good intermission, because I'm done with the first part. I'm getting ready to tell you the second part. Okay, so in the second part of all this, so what goes on? What has went on now? What has went on now is that the United States dollar became all-powerful as the reserve currency of the whole world. And et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. So anyway,
Dollar.
Yeah, the dollar. The U.S. dollar became reserve currency of the whole world. Okay, that should say something. What ended up happening was it happened in the spiritual and in the natural. In the spiritual, post Third Coming, here's what happened, and in the natural, post United Nations founding, here's what happened. In Sergei Lavrov's speech, he said that what has happened, and this is exactly what I had noticed had happened in the spiritual, and I've been trying to say has happened in the spiritual for a very long time. That is, post Third Coming world, love divine world, etc. Lavrov said that the West had essentially, basically, he didn't say it quite this way, but I don't think he maybe, well, let me say it exactly how he said it. That way I do, because if I'm going to be anytime you do something in the political, you got to do it in the spiritual. Anytime you do something in the natural, you got to do it in the spiritual. So I got to do it the way he did it in the spiritual. I got to tell the story the way he told it in the natural. I got to tell it in the spiritual. This is my job to do. What had happened was that the Western powers took advantage of the situation of the UN to continue their dominance. Okay. The concept of the UN was a good concept, but what they did was they took advantage of the concept of the UN to their own benefit and to the disbenefit of the former colonized countries, basically. So, for example, let me ask you this. Here's what really happened. It was supposed to be that everybody was supposed to be equal. Okay, but that didn't end up being so. It ended up being that the leaders that were elected, like say in the Philippines, for example, or wherever, Philippines may or may not be the best example here, but a lot of these former colonized places, the people that were elected, or if not that, then the situation at hand led to them still being a junior partner, essentially, of the whole thing, of the West. They're still a junior partner of the West. So what happened was that, for example, before the UN, all the, as I said, the bananas and the coconuts and the good rice was all going to the United States or wherever, or the elites of Eastern Europe, of Western Europe. Okay, after the UN, and after the idea that everybody's going to have self-determination to their own destiny, well, shouldn't that mean that all of the good rice and the coconuts and the bananas that are grown in the Philippines should go to the people of the Philippines? Theoretically, it should. Okay, but that's not what happened. What happened was, and doesn't that mean that they should elect their own leaders and not be influenced by any of these Western leaders? But that's not what happened. What happened was they did not get any of that. They got their own president, but they are essentially a pawn, or they become a satellite state to the Western powers, to NATO. And essentially, colonialism has been preserved through the concept of anti-colonialism. So now you have the idea of anti-colonialism, which is a great idea, but it's essentially used, it's an idea that's so good that nobody would say it was wrong, but it's essentially used now as a means to control. It's the concepts, all the concepts. Sergei Lavrov was saying that the concepts of the UN, the original concepts of the UN, were so good that nobody could dare say anything against it. But they've only been used as a means to control the formerly controlled countries. Now, they're using it they use this concept of anti-colonialism to rule and control people without them even knowing it. Like, for example, they think, the empowerment, everybody, once we all realized we were all Christ and we felt empowered because we didn't have to listen to the message of Lord's anymore. Okay, and that's the way that all those countries feel whenever they feel, hey, we've got our own country, our own flag, and we've got our own democracy here, and we can vote for whoever of our own guy, and they all felt empowered. And what they've done is it's a false empowerment, because what they did was they gave them the false sense of empowerment to make them think that whatever they were doing was doing for themselves, and it really was never doing for themselves, because the guys that they put in to get elected probably were only going to be servants to their lords because they knew they had to be. Okay, the Western powers have not relinquished power. They just found a new way to colonize. That's what went on. Okay, that's what Sergei Lavrov said, essentially. You can watch the speech for yourself, and he was talking about how the global South was in this situation of all this. And I would just ask you this. Like I said, I've been to the Philippines 3 times, okay? And I tried to get an idea of what it was like to live there under the conditions that they have to live under. And, they were eating corn rice, and which is the cheapest rice that you can get. And I ate corn rice, I just ate whatever everybody else was eating pretty much. And, well, maybe not always. I might have snuck in a pizza or a hamburger here or there when I could, some American food. But y'all did a good job of feeding me American food when I was over there, wifey. But anyway, nonetheless, I got a concept of what it would be like to live there. And like the wife said the other day, we was talking about the corn rice situation, and she said, on a good month, you would have actual rice. If you made good money that month, you'd have actual rice. You didn't make very good money, well, you ate corn rice. Okay. My question is why, if the Filipinos have self-determination and right to their own destiny, then wouldn't that have meant that all the good food that was going to the West, essentially the Western elite countries, wouldn't that mean that all that good food would now stay in their own country, and that they would get to partake of the good fruits of their own country? But that's not what happened. And if that didn't happen in the natural, then it did not happen in the spiritual. And what's went on here is that, see, what I was talking about was it was the fruits. It was the fruits that they grow in their land, the spiritual fruits, the natural fruits, you see. And so the same thing must be going on now, because the Western elites, who are the Western elites? Who are the Western elites now? The Western elites now are the modernized form of the old elites. Who were the old elites? The message. Who are the modern elites now? The love divine. Because the love divine was the ones that brought in all this concept of, you're the Christ, etc., etc. You determine your own destiny. That was third coming in the beginning, and then it was love divine. But it's the same concept of things. And in the beginning, it was a great idea. But what happened was it never really turned out to be that you actually had fair representation to keep your own fruits, because like I said, in the natural, they don't get that. In the natural, they don't get to eat their good rice and everything over in the Philippines, do they? So that means that in the spiritual, neither do they. They don't get to eat it either. So they said, okay, well, we got rid of all these these old message pastors that was trying to rule over us. Okay, and we've got our own third coming love divine style type of church now, and our post UN church essentially, and we're self-determinant now. Okay, no. What happened was I hate to tell you all, but they just found a better way to dupe you. That's all that happened. You just got duped in a better way. You're still not getting your good rice. You're still not getting to have your fruits. You're still not. You don't have the right to say essentially anything. You just essentially toe the modern line of anti-colonialism, which still colonizes you. Essentially, is what happens. The love divine has colonized you in a modern sense. Now, of course, they don't call it colonization because they have to have like deniable plausibility, or I guess it'd be the word for it. It's a subversive way of doing it. It's subversive, and it's a deniable plausibility to say, well, now we don't have colonies, because if you try to say, I've been trying to say for years, I was like, I'd be talking about the third coming mindset as a whole, and the philosophy and the people of it, and well, maybe not necessarily directed at the people, but the concepts that they were pushing and this and that. And I would say, your people, I would refer to them as kind of like your people of the love divine, and the love divine response is always, well, they're not our people, because they don't believe in colonialism anymore. But that's really just a subversive way of doing it, because see, the Westerners, the Western elite countries, if the Russians, for example, would say, well, your colonies, they would say, well, your people there that are sending you all the good bananas and coconuts and good rice, and of course the West would respond by saying, oh, well, they're not our people anymore. We don't believe in colonialism anymore, but they're still getting all the coconuts, rice, and bananas. Okay, so it's just completely subversive. It's just they took anti-colonialism and made it a way to essentially still have colonialism in a sense. It's just modern colonialism is all it is. It didn't get rid of colonialism. It's just a modern style of colonialism. Probably never get rid of colonialism. That's just how it works. Okay, so anyway, so what I'm saying is that the love divine, that system of everything, is modern, is colonialism modernized. It didn't get rid of colonialism. It modernized colonialism. So they're all still colonized. In the natural, in the post-UN natural world, all these former colonies are still colonized. In the spiritual, post-third coming world, all these church people, the Love Divine church people are still colonized. It's a modern version of colonialism. Nothing has changed. They're all still colonized. It's modern. It's just a modern version of colonialism. So whenever you see these churches in the Philippines or in Africa, because that's where they're all at, coincidentally, right? The global South. Okay, whenever you see all those churches that are all Love Divine, post Third Coming churches, whatever, okay, they are nothing but modern spiritual colonial churches. That's all they are. Nothing has changed. And that's exactly what Sergei Lavrov was getting at in his speech. He was talking about how that, a couple things. He said that in at least the theme of it, that they used the UN to just modernize colonialism, essentially. That's kind of what he was getting at. I don't know if he said it quite that way, but then he said what they do is they use they come up with an idea that's so good that nobody could possibly deny it, to badger you over the head with you, or badger that, to use that as a weaponization against you, essentially. So, like for example, the Love Divine and post Third Coming world have all these ideas, which are ideas that are so good you couldn't possibly say anything against them. You know, how could you possibly say anything against love everybody? You know, don't go to war with anybody. We don't believe in colonialism anymore. You know, how could you possibly say anything? It's exactly what Sergei Lavrov said. He said they come up with these ideas that are the UN concept was so good that nobody could dare say anything against it. But that was only used as a means of weaponization against anybody who would try to have a legitimate argument against some of the things that are going on, essentially. And this is what I have been trying to do for years, folks. I have been trying to free you. I have been trying to get to get my knife blade up under the thing and try to pry it open, to pry the can open, so I could get you all to eat this, so that you all would understand that that essentially you've been duped. You've been duped again, and I've just been trying to get you all to understand that you've been colonized again. And these are the subversive means that they have used to do it. Is, like I said, that it's something that's so good that you couldn't, because what has the Love Divine Church done for so long? It has used this concept of what was it? The love blessed concept, all this stuff. It was a concept.
Love one another.
Yeah, the whole love one another thing, love one another, and oh, by the way, send us your good spiritual fruits so that we can have them. So we modern colonial elites can have them. Anyway, they come up with something so good that you can't possibly say anything against it, and then use that. If anybody had anything, I have had several good arguments over the years to say, hey, something is not right here. That if you said what we have, if we really have what you say, then there's no way that this can be right. I found several things over the years. I said, this does not add up. And I would always say, hey, I would always bring it up and I'd say, this don't add up. If you claim that this is what you've given us, then this does not add up. And what was the concept? The answer was always, well, you can't possibly say anything against this message because it's love everybody. How could you possibly say anything against this message? And shut that down. Shut down any idea that you had to be able to try to expose to some degree what was going on. Okay, they used love as a way to get you to shut up, essentially.
It's a good weapon.
Huh?
It's a good weapon.
It's a good weapon. What better weapon could you have than love? There's no better weapon than love. The Message Church did the same things. All the churches have always done the same things. They always used love as a weapon. A good example is down in the Message Church. I remember whenever I first heard the Third Coming, I was about out of there. But, what would be their concept? You say, hey guys, I'm not sure if this is all this is what it ought to be here, and they'd always be like, what would be their probably prime answer? Well, don't worry about that. Just love everybody. Hey, I'm not sure that your guys' ideas on exactly what Branham said here is the right way to go. Well, don't worry, Jesus is coming soon. Just love everybody. Okay. It's the same subversive tactics now. They have used a concept so good that if you try to bring up something and say, I'm not sure that this love divine message is all it's cracked up to be. I'm not sure that we really have the freedoms that you're talking about here. Well, just love everybody. See, it's a great weapon. There's no better weapon than love. And I think Sergei Lavrov, he was talking about, the U.S. dollar being the reserve currency of the world was presented as just like, the best thing ever. But it was only a means of it's crying. It was only a means of control, only a means of the West getting the better of everybody else, essentially. I don't want to use control, might not even be the right word for it, because but they're getting the advantage of, let's say, everybody else. And so what you have to really have your own self-determination, or your own right to self-determination. Okay, these things, what we've gotten here has not been right to self-determination. And your spiritual fruits are, they're still going to the elites, let's say. Like if you, what was it back in the day? It used to be more so on a money front. Now, I don't know to what extent it's still on a money front, but nonetheless, it's your spiritual fruits, whether you're given physical money or whether you're given, you're just showing up to the church or whatever, then that is your spiritual fruits that are going to the elites of the same process of, and it's going through the running dog, like you had in these colonies. You had these running dog presidents that were nothing but just satellites of the bigger countries, even after the UN. That's exactly what you got now with these pastors over in like the Philippines or wherever in Africa that are still just really satellites of the greater concept of the thing, or I wouldn't say the pastors. I don't want to put it necessarily on the people, but the concepts that is there is a running dog satellite state of the major concept of love divinism. And your spiritual fruits are going there. You're not getting them yourself. You're not getting to keep the spiritual fruits yourself. Now, this is not to say that you do not commune with each other, okay? I'm just saying that, let me get into that. Some of the next things that Lavrov talked about, and I'm not doing this, it'd have been better if I could have listened to that maybe about 10 times and got a better idea on it, but I got the general idea. Hopefully you're getting a general idea of what I'm saying. Let me talk about the next parts of it. What you have is, sorry, car horn going off, car alarm. Okay, so what you have is, you have essentially NATO in the West. All countries are in the UN, okay? And it's been a single polar world, essentially. It's been, just one the UN rules all, and there's all just one big thing, okay? And then you have the NATO countries, and then you have the NATO countries are the old Western elite countries, and then you have the what is called the BRICS countries. Everything was the U.S. dollar ruled everything, and that's just that, and the Western elites. But it was the UN, but it was really the Western elites ruling everything. But it was technically the UN, which is everybody ruling everything, and the American dollar as the reserve currency. So it was all one thing. Everything's one thing. Okay. And so anyway, but now what's going on in the natural is, and it hasn't. I would say it's taken power, but it's coming in. It seems that they are making what's called the BRICS nations, and that's an agreement that is kind of outside of the UN, the UN theme of things, the Western-dominated UN theme of things, and the American dollar as the reserve currency theme of things. Okay, and so anyway, the BRICS stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, and there's a lot of other countries involved in it too. But what it is they're basically coming together as, from what I gather of it, a concept against this Western ruled or Western advantaged UN and American dollar reserve world currency. Okay, so that's the alternative. They're presenting themselves as an alternative to that. And what you have is that has been essentially the love divine concept, because it was the UN. It was everybody's one, one thing. And the American dollar is the one reserve currency. It was one and one, everything's one. Okay, because it's love divinism 101 is everything's one, essentially. Okay. And so what I'm saying is that once you understand that it's not being what it's all been cracked up to be, that you really have been, it's been subversive tactics to, for them to still be advantaged over the disadvantaged, then the BRICS nations raised up, and in the natural. And what I'm suggesting is that it must also be so in the spiritual. I'm not suggesting revolution here, okay, in a sense, but I'm just saying that whatever's done in the natural has to be done in the spiritual. So it would seem to me that in terms of the message, in terms of the love divine message or whatever, as a whole, then there must be a BRICS equivalent, which is an alternative to the love divine philosophy out here. And that is what I believe I have been preaching for years and years and years here. It's the alternative to the love divine philosophy. And legitimately so, because I have been saying for the very longest time that it was not all what it was cracked up to be. It was a good concept, so good that you couldn't say anything against it without them weaponizing it and using it as a weapon to shut you down, essentially. But so that's what I'm saying. It was not what it was supposed to be. So anyway, apparently people around the world have figured that out too in the natural. And I think it's time for people in the spiritual world to also figure that out. That it was just not what it was all cracked up to be. Good idea in the beginning. Third coming, great idea, concept. That's exactly what Lavrov said in his speech. He said the original concepts of the UN were great ideas. And but what it's become is a Western-dominated system using the concept that everybody's equal as a way to gain advantage over everybody else. And that's what's going on. That's what's going on in the spiritual too. It's using a concept that's so good to gain an advantage over everybody else. To have a let me put it to you this way. In the book Animal Farm is a famous book, and in the book Animal Farm, it was about all these farm animals that were trying to form a government of sorts at the farm. And you had your leaders, and I can't remember what all animals was this or that, but anyway, so they made a decree that all animals are equal. But it turned out to be, by the end of it, that all animals are equal, except some animals are more equal than other animals. And that's exactly what you've had. Yes, according to the love divine, according to the UN, all animals are equal. But the problem is that some animals have been more equal than other animals, or there has been a philosophy, a conceptual philosophy that has been more equal than other conceptual philosophies in the love divine. Okay? I could put it another way. The idea was, at the beginning, which was, as I said, a good idea in the Third Coming days, was that everybody, which is still, the concept, even in the love divine, is still a concept, is that we're all Christ. Okay, well now, if we're all Christ, then that got rid of the concept of somebody being Lord over top of you, because how could anybody be Lord over top of you? Because we're all Christ, right? Okay. Well, if we're all Christ, we're already at the top. Everybody's at the top, and we're all there. You know, however you want to look at it, or something like that. Or we're all even. We're all Christ. Okay. But the problem has not been that we're not all Christ. The problem has been that some have been more Christ than others. All animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than other animals. All Christs are equal in the post-third coming love divine world, but some Christs in the post-divine love divine, or post-third coming love divine world are more equal than others. And I don't mean that necessarily towards any individuals. I mean that in terms of philosophies. The philosophies here, the ideologies that are put out in the post-third coming love divine world, some of those philosophies are considered lesser than other philosophies. It's all Christ. Everybody, you could pretty much say it's individualized. It's individual people putting out the philosophy. So you could go that far, but I don't want to go. I want to get. I want to try to keep this as presidential as possible, as the way that Sergei Lavrov gave the speech. He gave the speech in such a way that was, what's the word for it? Stately. And I want to be stately about it. So it's these concepts. The concepts, see, here's the thing about it. If we're all Christ, then how did it get to be that some of the concepts are lesser than some of the others? It makes no sense, because you still got concepts that are lesser than the others. Of all the people that are supposed to all be Christ, though. It's a funny thing, isn't it? And that's exactly what happened in like I was saying with the natural side of things, is that all these countries have a seat at the UN, but not everybody's got the same power of influence. You see what I mean? It's some people's they just don't matter as much as others, what they have to say, and that's essentially what's happened. That's essentially what's happened at the UN. That's what Sergei Lavrov was saying, essentially. And that's essentially what's happened in the love divine, is that the influence of some has been greater than others, and that's not what it was supposed to be. That's exactly what Sergei Lavrov said. He said that's not what it was supposed to be. That was not the original concept, and what it's turned into is not the original concept of what it was supposed to be in the third coming beginning. And so people, the BRICS nations, I think, perhaps they're trying to say, hey, we're going to set out as an alternative to what this has become. And that is what I'm doing. I'm setting out as an alternative to what the love divine concept of this whole thing has become. And that is why I'm saying this message. Because, like I said, when it happens in the natural, it's got to be in the spiritual. And whenever Sergei Lavrov went to the UN and made that speech, and maybe I'll add it in. I'll put a link to it or something under here. If my wife can do that, I don't know how. I could probably figure it out. But anyway, she's the computer whiz. But anyway, I'll try to put a link to his speech down there so you all will get the concept of what I'm saying. But I am saying his speech in the spiritual terms. Somebody had to go to the UN and make the speech. Okay. That's a few other things I could say. But anyway, everybody's Christ, but not everybody, we got to the point where everybody was Christ. Yeah, third coming, everybody's Christ, right? So, well, if everybody's Christ, then everybody's equal, right? Okay, no. What happened was some Christs were more equal than other Christs. You see what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than other animals. Mm-hmm. So you can be, everybody's equal. See, that was how they got you. But they didn't tell you that some of the people, some of the philosophies of the love divine were more equal than other philosophies that people had surrounding the message too. Mm-hmm. And that's what they used to subvert the whole thing, and to still keep it to where they had their elites and their downtrodden. Mm-hmm. Okay, and that's why I said that's why I think the BRICS. That's probably the BRICS have had enough of it. They've had enough of this Western dominated. You know, they're rising up as an alternative. And to me, there's got to be a BRICS, a spiritual BRICS. There should be a spiritual BRICS because there should be an alternative to rise up against what has went on here. I think it's time for it. I think there are probably a few people. I won't mention any names, but I do know that there was one guy in, and I'd be interested to see what he thinks about this. But there was one guy in the Philippines, a preacher of sorts in the Philippines, and I won't mention his name. Like I said, I want to keep it stately. But I'd be interested to see what he thinks about it because he was a pro-BRICS guy in the natural way back. Okay. Now, here's another concept. Here's another thing. How is it, if we're going to make everything natural and spiritual, and this is about to be the end of it because I think I made my point, but if we're going to make the natural and the spiritual absolutely type out, then how exactly is it that that I, for example, can be a Russian foreign minister? Obviously, I'm not Russian, right? Okay. Well, in terms of spiritual philosophy of sorts of things right now, I guess apparently I am. So I do know that my philosophy on things has never really been. It's always been an alternative viewpoint to the concepts, the main concepts of things. I've had that all throughout, and I didn't necessarily want to be an alternative, but that's just what I've pretty much always been since back after the end of the Third Coming, and since back at the end of the founding of the UN. And that's pretty much what Russia has always been. That them and a few other countries have always been an alternative to the Western-led situation, a Western advantage situation of things. So that's apparently what I am. It's what I'm doing here, and Sergei Lavrov said, he was talking about how that in the global south you had, not only did you have the BRICS nations, but you had things rising up like the African Union and I guess it was called the ASEAN or something like that. I don't know if that was the group that he had referred to, but it was it was kind of like alternative groups to the status quo system of things, and he was kind of praising them. And to me, that's what we need. I don't want to. If BRICS is going to rise up, if a spiritual BRICS rose up, I'm not interested. I don't want to. I'm not doing this to try to be a leader or something. I'm just saying what's going on here, and I just want to be amongst those. I just want to be one of the countries of those, one of the thought processes of those that does rise up, and. But anyway, to me, there should be like an African Union essentially. Say I'm Russia. Okay, cool. All right, but you still got like China and all these other places, right? So there must be some sort of representation thought process. I don't know how that works. Maybe I represent more than one. I don't know, whatever. But I don't know exactly how that works. But if this is the case, let's say I'm just one thing of it, then there's probably like 4 or 5 other countries out there or philosophies out there that are out there too that would be different in their nativity or the way they are, but would agree on this point of the creating this alternative to the system of the low Davinic thing of things, way of things. And so, but anyway, he was talking about the African Union, and it's like, well, there's an alternative, kind of like, and I was like, yeah, that's really what we need. We need an African Union of Lovedovinism or post-Lovedovinism. We need some of those African churches and African leaders to unionize against this, to unionize against being taken advantage of by this more equal than thou. You know, we used to have holier than thou. Now we got more equal than thou. That's what I said about. I've been saying this stuff for years about the love divine. That it's the same thing over again. It's just in a different form. It don't fix anything. It's just, you know, we had it was holiness. See, back in the church days, back in the imperial pre-World War II, pre-UN, pre-Third Coming church days, it was all about, you know, who was the holiest, right? You know, the holiest preacher, holier than thou. You know, that was what they believed in. You ever heard of holier than thou? It was called the holier than thou attitude. And what it was everybody that went to the church was holy. But the guy who went to prayer meeting 3 times a week and this and that, you know, he probably had a holier than thou attitude. You know, so it's everybody's holy, but holier than thou. And now we've got everybody's equal, but some people are some philosophies out here are more equal than others. So they've got more influence than others. And that's not what it's supposed to be. That was never what it was supposed to be. It was never supposed to be. The UN was never supposed to be. And everybody goes there and everybody sits there and everybody gets to talk. Everybody should have the same influence as everybody else, but that's not what happens. Because when the United States goes up to talk, well, they got more influence than, you know, some other country. That's not the point. That's not what it's supposed to be, but that's what happened. That's what you got now. Mm-hmm. You've got these Lovedovinic philosophies out here that have been here for the longest time, and they have more equal. Everything's equal, but it's more equal. It has more influence than others, and like, you know, all their ideas have been. Anybody that ever had an alternative viewpoint on it, trust me, folks. Try having an alternative viewpoint to the love divine. You're gonna be reminiscent about being under the imperial message lords real quick. Okay, for those of you who have never had an alternative viewpoint to the love divine, then if you ever get on Facebook or something and try to put out an alternative viewpoint to that, from, you know, like I said, being somewhat related to it and within it, because that's exactly, you know, if you were in the message church and you had a different viewpoint than them on something, yeah, you see where that went real quick. And it's the same thing with the love divine. I got in there and I noticed, I said, wait a minute, I said, this didn't help us any. I said, we've still got the same problems that we had, it's just in a modern form. Because you would get in there, you would try to have an alternative viewpoint from within inside the Lovedovinic ideology, essentially, the rough foundation of it. And if you had that, then you would get shut down. They would shut you down through their subversive means of weaponizing love or weaponizing the general theme of the thing against you. If you had a legitimate alternative gripe or issue or complaint or whatever, and that was the point of the UN, was so that you could go and express a legitimate gripe and concern. But what happened was you had no influence, so they just shut you down and you kept on sending your coconuts and bananas to the elitist countries. Okay? But anyway, if you try that, and it's the same thing in the love divine, if you ever tried that, it's going to shut you down. They'll shut you down just as fast as a message pastor would shut you down. You know? Mm-hmm. So it's just, it's only a modern version of what we had. Now, can you say it's better? Well, I can play devil's advocate here. I can really play devil's advocate, because it's like this. Like the wife said the other day, the wife mentioned. She said that, oh yeah, I was going to say about the African Union. See, the African Union, it seems to me that there should be some pastors or leaders in Africa that are love divine people that should recognize this and unionize against this as an alternative to it, because that's what the African Union is in the natural. So you would think that there would be such a thing rise up in the spiritual. Okay, then the BRICS countries, all this should be the Far East Asian Union of sorts. You know, this should all, you know, there should be people who are going to rise up as an alternative to this. But anyway, here to play devil's advocate, I can look at it from every angle. Now from the it's my job, I believe, and it's my position and my place to be Sergei Lavrov in this point, and to be the Russians, I guess, and or to be that type of thing, and to make this point and to say all these things. Okay, but also I suppose if you were a Russian, for example, then you wouldn't look at the West as though they hadn't done some good things. You know, even though they had taken advantage of the world in the sense that they had through the subversive means of the UN. I'm just calling it like it is. That's what happened. Okay, and that's what's happening in the spiritual world with the love divine. Okay, but you couldn't say that they didn't give us a few good things probably along the way. You know, like for example, I watch wrestling almost every Monday night. Well, you know, that's an American thing. You know, and even though it's made up and this and that, well, I still like it. So I mean, you know, what do? Yeah. And the Russians are the same way. They love like rock and roll music from the West. You know, they love a lot of Western stuff. So they would probably say the same thing. They would say, you know, we're not saying that the West didn't give us some good things. I'm not saying that the love divine didn't give us some good things. But I'm just trying to tell the whole story. I think that's a fair representation. They've been subversive, but they have given us some good things. Okay, so I mean that's as fair as I can make it. I'm saying there's got to be. I'm just saying that I am an alternative too. And you know, I think if you looked at probably the BRICS countries, I think that that's probably the way they look at themselves as an alternative to the because you know it's like alternative rock, for example. Yeah, I preached this a long time ago. I said that Kurt Cobain and Nirvana was like it was alternative rock, and it come along right after. And I'll say this, and I'm about done. Right after Axl Rose and Guns N' Roses. See, Axl Rose was born in Lafayette, Indiana. He's like the Don Parnell type. He's an Aquarius. He was born in a Pentecostal household, and he was you know, born in a Pentecostal household where they, you know, it was kind of like Branhamism the way they thought. And anyway, he became the lead singer of Guns N' Roses, and Guns N' Roses is kind of like the bridge band between the old style glam rock and the new style, and when alternative rock really hit with grunge and whatnot. Okay, I know that's a mouthful, but anyway, so what was I going to say now? Yeah, so Guns N' Roses come along, and Guns N' Roses kept going even after alternative rock was going. You know, you had Guns N' Roses and alternative rock at the same time. Okay, I'm not saying that we get rid of Guns N' Roses. See, Axl Rose and Kurt Cobain had a big feud, and they didn't get along. But the thing about it was they were both singing rock and roll. At the end of the day, it was both rock and roll. But Nirvana, the band Nirvana, which is Kurt Cobain, was alternative rock, but still rock. So you've got to have rock and alternative rock. You've got to have Guns N' Roses, and you've got to have Nirvana. And I'm not saying we get rid of the love divine. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that there's got to be some alternative rock guys out here. Where are my alternative rock guys at? Where are you at? Where are you people that think in terms of BRICS, of love divinic BRICS, as opposed to love divinic NATO? Where are you at? This message is for you, wherever you're at, because the alternative rock guys, they saw how kind of like, they didn't like regular rock in a way, although it's all rock, but they didn't like, their beef with regular rock was that it had become kind of commercialized and subversive, and it wasn't, quite what it was supposed to be, what rock and roll was supposed to be. That's what alternative rock brought to it. And that's exactly what I'm saying. I'm saying that I'm the alternative. I think it's our rock and roll here, our post-third coming love divine world, that whole side of philosophy of things is not what it was supposed to be. That's not what rock and roll was supposed to be, at least in the way I look at it. And there was plenty of other people who thought that because grunge rock took off. Grunge, alternative rock, it took off. And because they recognized that although that was still pretty good, was not really what it was supposed to be. You know, Guns N' Roses was maybe a little bit more commercialized and this and that than what they thought rock ought to be. And that's exactly what I'm saying. I'm saying that the Love Divine side of it has become a little bit more commercialized and not what I think rock ought to be. So, but it's all rock and roll, but I am the alternative to it. I've been saying this all throughout, and BRICS is the alternative to the American dollar. BRICS is the alternative to the Western-led UN, essentially, philosophy of things. We have to have an alternative. This has to be. Whether anybody agrees with me or does not agree with me. In the natural, if it happened in the natural, it's got to happen in the spiritual, and that's why I'm here saying it. And there's got to be an alternative to the Love Divine. There has to be. So, so anyway, let's see if anybody shows up. Let's see. After I put this out, let's see if anybody shows up. So, anyway, what I guess I could. I need to play the Russian national anthem or something. In my signing off, I need to. Anyway, Sergei Lavrov, whenever he was done, and he got out of there. So that's what I'm going to do too. So I'm done. But I think I've made a very good point here. And anyway, wifey, I'd rather you turn it off, that way I don't mess it up, because I don't want to lose it, because I thought that was a very good version of that sermon.
Okay.